The following is a special extended episode of Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. We apologize for the length of this show. However, we believe that this information is far too important to leave anything out. Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace, or do they have more sinister motives? Join Mad Mark as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that puzzle us all on Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode: how are the Anunnaki still controlling Earth in these modern times, and how does it involve the Epstein files? Hello everyone, and welcome to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. I am Mad Mark, and before I begin, just a quick reminder to please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. Newsflash: I am now on Patreon. Become a member and receive lots of cool benefits, such as free personalized video messages and or phone calls from Mad Mark. Hey, that's me. And you'll be able to watch all the new episodes of the show 2 days before they appear on YouTube or Spotify. Just click the Patreon link down in the show notes and you'll be all set. And I would like to give a special shout out to my good friend Lucas Henry, who is not only my first Patreon subscriber, but he also was the one who suggested that I create a Patreon account. So again, a big shout out to Lucas Henry for all his help in the Patreon situation. Okay, this is going to be a long and hair-raising episode, so with no further ado, I just want to dive right into it. You know, I am repeatedly asked by fans of the show how the Anunnaki are still controlling our planet in these modern times. And with the Epstein case making constant headlines, I think that this is the perfect time to answer that question. Because you see, these two topics go hand in hand. But before I begin, I have some homework for you. If you are truly interested in how the Anunnaki are controlling our planet, then I need you to watch a movie. That's right. Pause this episode right here. I promise we'll still be here when you return, and buy, rent, or stream Stanley Kubrick's 1999 film Eyes Wide Shut, starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. It's available on YouTube, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Google Play Movies, and Fandango for just $5.99, or you can buy your own DVD copy from eBay. I checked on there, and it's only slightly more, so it's up to you. Most of you have probably never seen this film, and even if you have, it's probably been a while. So watch it again, and watch it closely this time, because today we are not going to analyze a film. We are going to read a confession. In 1999, a man who had spent 30 years embedded in the highest levels of European and American society finished a film that described with documentary precision the secret world he had been living adjacent to for decades. He showed it to the people who needed to approve it, and he was dead 6 days later. And the studio immediately modified what he had made. And the public watched the modified version, filed it under confusing Tom Cruise movie, and forgot about it within weeks. Then, 20 years later, the files dropped. The Epstein court documents, the flight logs, the victim depositions, the sealed records that litigation finally forced into the public domain. And people who had seen Eyes Wide Shut and dismissed it started watching it again. This time, they were not watching a film. They were watching a documentary, a film that described with a precision that nobody inventing a story could have achieved the exact operational structure of the network that Jeffrey Epstein had spent 2 decades running in reality. Stanley Kubrick completed his final cut of Eyes Wide Shut in January of 1999. After a shoot that lasted for 400 consecutive days, the longest continuous film shoot in the documented history of cinema. Before that, years of preparation, research so exhaustive that his production team described it as unlike anything they had experienced on any previous film. He showed it privately to Warner Brothers executives, to Tom Cruise, and to Nicole Kidman in late January 1999. The screening took place at Kubrick's estate at Childwickbury Manor in Hertfordshire, England. People who were in that room have never spoken publicly about what they saw. The studio executives who attended have given no interviews about their experience of watching Kubrick's cut. 6 days after that screening, Kubrick died in his sleep. He was 70 years old. Official cause: cardiac arrest. No autopsy was performed. His body was cremated quickly. His family issued a statement accepting the official explanation. The entertainment press ran obituaries about a reclusive genius finally at rest after a legendary career. Within a week, the coverage had moved on entirely. What did not move on was the film, because Warner Brothers, not after a period of reflection about how to honor the director's vision, but immediately within days, began modifying the film. Nicole Kidman described what she saw in that screening as unsettling in a way she found difficult to articulate. This is the language people use when something has disturbed their model of reality rather than their feelings. When what they have experienced has made the world seem different rather than simply made them feel something. 26 years of silence from everyone in that screening room. This is where we begin. Here is a detail about Eyes Wide Shut that almost no mainstream analysis has ever addressed, and that you will immediately recognize as significant. The mansion where the Somerton ritual takes place is not a set. Kubrick did not construct a fictional estate on a studio backlot, which would have given him complete control over every visual element. He chose a real location. He filmed the central ritual sequence of Eyes Wide Shut in a real house, and the house he chose was Mentmore Towers in Buckinghamshire, England. Mentmore Towers was commissioned in 1852 and completed in 1854 for Meyer Amschel de Rothschild, grandson of Meyer Amschel Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, the family who by the mid-19th century controlled the largest private fortune in the world and exercised financial influence over most of the major governments of Europe. The architect who designed it was told to create something that announced in physical form the arrival of a new kind of power, a power that was not aristocratic in the traditional sense, but that had surpassed the aristocracy in every practical measure that mattered. The house was designed to make this point to anyone who entered it, and it succeeded. The Rothschild family occupied Mentmore Towers until 1977. The house itself passed through several owners before Kubrick filmed there in the mid-1990s. He chose this building specifically to film a ritual depicting the secret ceremonies of the global elite. The building's history, its prominence, its architecture, the specific quality of power it was designed to embody was not incidental to his choice. It was the reason for his choice. Kubrick filmed their ritual in their house. he put his actors in robes and Venetian masks and filmed them performing an occult ceremony in the physical space that the Rothschild family had built and inhabited for over a century. The Somerton estate in Eyes Wide Shut is not a fictional place that gestures toward the world of elite power. It is a real place that belongs to it. At this point, we have to wonder, why the masks? If you've seen the film, then you know what I'm talking about. Yes, they add a sense of the macabre and darkness to the event, but was that their only purpose? Admission to these exclusive events was by invitation only. These guests were the most elite in the global society. Everyone should have known or at least been acquainted with one another. So why keep everyone's identity a secret? Could it be that there were Anunnaki present at this party? Entities who wish to remain anonymous? The entire event looks rather satanic, doesn't it? But I have proven time and time again on this show that there is no devil. It's a fictional character created by the church, and it doesn't exist. But these are events attended by the most elite of the global elites, the pinnacle of human society. These people are not stupid, nor prone to believing in fairy tales. So why the satanic type attire? Let's examine this more closely. Yes, these look like rituals to Satan, but in reality, they are rituals to the ancient gods known as Baal or Moloch. And who are they? Stick around, we'll get back to that a bit later. For now, let's continue with Stanley Kubrick and his attention to detail when setting up the location and the scenes for these ceremonial scenes in the film. Kubrick viewed photographs from the Rothschilds' Surrealist Ball of 1972. The photographs that have survived and circulated show guests arriving in elaborate animal head masks, full face masks, costumes that deliberately blur the line between the human and the symbolic. The table arrangements include imagery that operates at the absolute limit of what could be photographed and still be called a dinner party. The guests include members of the European financial aristocracy, senior political figures, and cultural elites whose names appear in the same networks that the Epstein documents would later map. Audrey Hepburn attended, Salvador Dali attended, members of several European royal families attended. Kubrick did not research what elite rituals might look like and construct a fictional version. He looked at what they really looked like and filmed them in one of their actual houses. Jeffrey Epstein's Little St. James Island operated on the same architectural logic as Mentmore and Fier. A controlled environment, private, geographically and legally isolated, chosen specifically because what happened could not be seen from outside and could not be easily reached by any jurisdiction that might wish to investigate. The island had a main house, guest quarters, a massage pavilion, and a blue and white striped structure that multiple visitors described as a temple. What the temple was used for has never been established in court. What is documented is that it was built, that it was maintained, that it was central to the island's layout, and that Epstein went to considerable expense and effort to keep its interior inaccessible to people who were not specifically invited into it. It certainly looks Jewish, doesn't it? But there is more to it than that. You're not seeing the big picture. You're not going back far enough. Remember, Abraham, the father of the Jewish faith, was born and raised in Sumer, and the stories of the Anunnaki gods were not the only things that he brought to Israel when he relocated there on the instructions of his god Enlil. He also brought along his customs, his ways of life, and the architecture he was accustomed to. This is not only Jewish architecture, it's Sumerian architecture as well. The Jews copied Sumerian structural designs and then expanded on them. Let's take that dome, for instance. Do you think the Israelites invented that? Most certainly not. The ancient Sumerians were the first to incorporate domes in their structures. They often utilized corbelled domes made of mud bricks, most often seen on top of temple shrines, ziggurats, and the homes of the upper classes. Now here's a tie-in between the Israelites and the Anunnaki that I guarantee you did not see coming, although I did hint at it in episode 13 of season 1. Remember this? After the deluge, in addition to a new spaceport, the Anunnaki also needed a new mission control center to replace the damaged one that had been in Nippur. And the site chosen for this new location? None other than Mount Moriah. And where exactly is Mount Moriah, you may ask? Right outside the city of Jerusalem. Yes, indeed. The second Anunnaki Mission Control Center on Earth was built on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem after the original Mission Control Center in Sumer was destroyed by the Great Flood. Then, after the Enlilites bombed Sodom and Gomorrah and the second spaceport in the Sinai, this one too was abandoned. There was no longer a need for it once the spaceport had been destroyed. Now, according to religious texts, they will try to tell you that King Solomon chose this site to build his first temple because he was fulfilling some divine directive, that it was the site where Abraham had been told to sacrifice his son to Enlil. Interesting coincidence indeed, but that was not the reason that it was chosen. They will also tell you that it was the site where God appeared to King David and deemed it the place to store the Ark of the Covenant. Well, perhaps. We don't know that for sure. We weren't there. But maybe that is true, and yet it's all irrelevant. The real reason that spot was chosen for the first Jewish temple was because it had been an important site to the gods. And if it was important to the gods, then it was a holy place, and thus important to the humans as well. Ironically enough, the Islamic Dome of the Rock now occupies the site of Solomon's original temple. But throughout the years, whatever was built on that site, the base has remained the same. The original base of the second Mission Control Center, the platform built by the Anunnaki. This base, oddly similar to the Great Pyramids in Giza and pre-Incan sites such as Tiwanaku and Cuzco in South America, was built without mortar and consists of stones weighing up to 570 tons, about the same weight as 2 fully loaded Boeing 747s. And yet, historians will have us believe that these structures were built by early humans with primitive tools, and the lies continue. So, Mentmore Towers, Chateau de Ferrer, Little St. James. The locations are different, but the archaeological logic is identical. Controlled environments, built or chosen by people who understood that power requires private space, space that operates outside the visibility of ordinary social accountability, outside the reach of ordinary legal consequence, outside the sight of anyone who has not been specifically permitted to see. Kubrick chose Mentmore because it was true. Location is always a statement, and in 40 years of filmmaking, Kubrick never made an unintentional one. The ceremony at Somerton was not invented. It has a name, a documented history, a published procedural text, and a traceable lineage that connects it directly to the networks of power that Eyes Wide Shut depicts. The ceremony is the Gnostic Mass. The Gnostic Mass describes a priest who presides from an elevated position, the Hierophant figure on the raised platform at Somerton. It describes a priestess who performs a specific sacramental function, the woman at the center of the Somerton ritual. It describes a congregation whose role is to witness and participate in the energy generated by the central working, the robed figures arranged in the circle. because any Wiccan will tell you that there is power in numbers when casting a spell. And these events were attended by people representing the highest levels of Western institutional power, military, intelligence, scientific, and the specific occult network whose central ritual Kubrick filmed at a Rothschild mansion in Buckinghamshire. This was not a collection of bohemian eccentrics performing harmless ceremonies in rented halls. It was a network that overlapped at its upper operational levels with the networks of actual institutional power, and by the time Kubrick made Eyes Wide Shut, that overlap had been developing for over half a century. The Epstein network's connection to intelligence operations has been analyzed by multiple researchers since the documents began emerging. Epstein's source of wealth has never been satisfactorily explained. He managed money for clients whose identities have not been fully disclosed. His professional trajectory, from a mathematics teacher at the Dalton School in Manhattan in the early 1970s to a billionaire financier by the 1980s, involved steps that do not correspond to any conventional account of financial career development. Former Israeli intelligence officer Ari Ben-Menashe claimed in an interview that Epstein and Maxwell worked together for Israeli intelligence from at least the late 1980s. The Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands, in litigation against Epstein's estate, alleged that Epstein maintained relationships with multiple intelligence agencies. These allegations have not been proven in court. They have also not been disproven, and the pattern of protection that Epstein received from law enforcement and prosecutorial institutions over 2 decades is consistent with the kind of protection that intelligence assets receive. Most viewers of Eyes Wide Shut hear the music during the Somerton ritual and process it as atmospheric, eerie, vaguely liturgical, effective mood setting for a disturbing sequence. What they are actually hearing is the most explicit occult declaration in the entire film, and Kubrick put it there because he knew exactly who would recognize it. The piece is called Backwoods Priests. It was composed by Jocelyn Pook for Eyes Wide Shut at Kubrick's personal direction. Kubrick had worked with other musicians in pre-production, but for the Somerton sequence specifically, he brought in Pook and gave her an instruction that is documented in Pook's own subsequent accounts of the collaboration. Take a recording of a Romanian Orthodox Christian liturgical chant, live sacred music recorded in an active religious context, and reverse it. Not adapt it, not sample it, reverse it, so that the words, the melodic phrases, the liturgical structure run backwards. Play the sacred forward music backwards and build the piece around that inversion. In Western ceremonial magic, the reversal of sacred liturgy is a ritual technology with a specific name and a specific operational function. It is called the Black Mass, and in its original ceremonial meaning, as distinct from the theatrical sensation-driven version that appears in horror fiction and popular culture, the Black Mass is not devil worship. It is the deliberate inversion of the directional flow of a ritual working. A forward mass, in the ceremonial understanding, calls something downward from the higher registers of the energetic hierarchy into manifestation on the physical plane. A reversed mass inverts this direction, working upward along what the tradition calls the left-hand path toward a different kind of working with a different kind of consequence. Kubrick did not put reversed sacred music over the Somerton ritual because it sounded eerie. He put it there because it was accurate, because the ceremony he was depicting was not the Gnostic Mass performed in its conventional direction. It was the Gnostic Mass performed in its inverted direction. the Black Mass in the original ceremonial sense, and he wanted anyone in his audience with sufficient knowledge of the tradition to hear this and understand immediately that what they were watching was not Kubrick's imagined version of what elite rituals might involve. It was documentation of what they actually are. The Epstein documents include descriptions from multiple victims of the environment at Little St. James that go beyond the specific acts of abuse. Several depositions describe a quality to the atmosphere of the island, a sense that the environment itself had been prepared to produce a specific state in the people present, a feeling reported independently by multiple witnesses who had no contact with each other, and that what was happening was ritualistic and intentional in a way that exceeded the intentions of individual acts. Several researchers with backgrounds in both intelligence analysis and esoteric tradition who have studied these depositions have noted that the descriptions are consistent with the preparation of a ritual working space, an environment designed not only as a venue for abuse, but as a prepared field for something that the initiate tradition would recognize as operative. Kubrick was not being atmospheric, he was being specific, and the initiated audience that he knew would eventually find this film heard exactly what he intended. Every structural element of the Epstein network that has been documented in court proceedings, in investigative journalism, and in released depositions corresponds exactly to an element of what Kubrick depicts in Eyes Wide Shut. Epstein maintained gatherings with a legitimate intellectual and social surface, dinner parties at his Manhattan townhouses on East 71st Street, the large private residence in New York City attended by Nobel laureates, heads of state, senior academics, and cultural figures who could provide honest testimony that they attended interesting dinner parties and nothing more. This outer layer was not incidental to the network, it was load-bearing. It provided social legitimacy, access to power, and a class of genuinely innocent participants whose honest denials provided cover for what the inner layer was doing. The Somerton gathering operates identically. There is an outer layer, the musicians, the people whose function is ambient, whose access is controlled, whose knowledge is incomplete. Bill gets into the outer layer with the first password. What he sees at the outer layer is disturbing, but it could be explained. The inner layer, what the second password opens, is something else entirely, the geographic isolation. Epstein chose locations specifically for their separation from ordinary legal accountability. Little St. James Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a ranch in Stanley, New Mexico, covering 10,000 acres of remote land, properties in jurisdictions chosen partly because they complicated questions of which authority had the power to investigate. The geographical separation was operational. It was chosen. It was maintained deliberately. Somerton is accessible only by private transportation at night through a route that Bill has to follow from a specific location. The geography of the gathering is controlled. You arrive the way they tell you to arrive, or you do not arrive. The Epstein documents include references from multiple sources to cameras installed in locations where guests had reason to expect privacy. The Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands, in litigation against Epstein's estate, alleged that Epstein installed surveillance equipment in his properties specifically to record interactions between guests and victims. This surveillance was not for security. It was for the creation of permanent records of participation, records that could be held indefinitely over the heads of these participants as a guarantee of continued silence and continued cooperation. At Somerton, Every participant is equally implicated. The shared transgression is the binding mechanism. No one present can expose anyone without exposing themselves. The ritual is not just a gathering, it is a mutual vulnerability creation event. Now, let's examine the Tom Cruise character Bill's exit from Somerton. He is permitted to leave because containment is more efficient than elimination, and he becomes neutralized as a witness not through violence, but through the Ziegler character's management of the situation. The system does not destroy unbound witnesses when it can instead transform them into people who are no longer quite sure of exactly what they witnessed. The Epstein documents confirm that the ultimate operational purpose of the network, beneath the adult social world, beneath the surveillance infrastructure and the geographic isolation and the managed exits, was access to and exploitation of minors. This is not speculation derived from the documents. It is the central finding of the prosecution, the civil litigation, and the depositions. And the billiard room scene is the operational center of Eyes Wide Shut. Ziegler sits across from Bill and, with the ease of a man who has done this many times, dismantles everything Bill experienced. The woman who died was troubled. Her death had nothing to do with Somerton. The warning was excessive security enthusiasm. Yes, those were important people at that party, but they were simply having fun. Ziegler explains that Bill was never in any real danger. The message? Nothing happened. And if nothing happened, there is nothing to report. Every sentence is a technique, not a lie that can be specifically disproven, but a reframe, a replacement of the witness's experiential reality with an alternative narrative plausible enough to accept, especially if the witness desperately wants to accept it, which the witness usually does because the alternative is acknowledging that they are in a situation with no good exit and no available protection. The Epstein network's survival for 2 decades was not the achievement of one person. It was the achievement of a class of Zieglers, people whose professional function was consequence management, deployed systematically around a network that understood from its design that consequences would eventually need to be managed. Kubrick showed us this figure, gave him warmth, gave him a reasonable face, made him the person in the film who explains everything clearly and gives Bill the narrative he needs to go home and go to sleep. Because the most dangerous person in any elite network is not the one who commits the acts. It is the one who sits across from the witness afterwards and calmly explains why what they saw was not what they think they saw. Bill gets into Somerton with the use of the password Fidelio. He obtains it from Nick Nightingale, the pianist who plays at these gatherings blindfolded, present enough to provide the right musical atmosphere, contained enough to never identify anyone. But the password only admits Bill to the outer layer. The inner circle demands a second password, one that Bill does not have, cannot invent, and cannot bluff his way through. The gap between the first password and the second is the structural key to every elite network of this kind that has ever existed. Albert Pike wrote in Morals and Dogma, published in 1871, that the symbols of Masonry carry different meanings at different degrees, that initiates at lower levels are deliberately given incomplete interpretations of the rituals they are performing, that the true meaning of the symbols is accessible only to those who have passed through the full initiatic sequence. The transparency of the structural deception was itself a demonstration of power. We are telling you that you are being deceived, and you still will not know what the truth is, because knowing about the deception does not grant access to what is being concealed. The Epstein network had the same two-layer architecture. There were people who attended Epstein dinners, MIT Media Lab director Joy Ito, theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, who maintained that they attended intellectual gatherings and nothing more. The investigation that followed Epstein's arrest treated these associations as potentially significant. The people involved have consistently said that they had no knowledge of the trafficking operation beneath the social surface. Some of these people are probably telling the truth. They were in the outer chamber. They had the first password. The network kept them there deliberately because their genuine innocence was the social camouflage. You cannot interrogate innocence that is real. Their honest, improvable ignorance was a structural feature of the network, maintained intentionally because it provided the most reliable protection against the kind of scrutiny that would only be possible if everyone present were implicated. The inner circle was smaller, more deliberately selected, and the transition from outer to inner was the mechanism that Somerton depicts. Once you crossed the threshold into the inner workings, once you had that second password, you had already done something that could destroy you. The second password was not additional knowledge. The second password was complicity. And complicity in a network operated by people who understand power at this level is permanent. It travels with the person who accepted it for the rest of their lives. The people who extended it knew exactly what they were creating when they did. This is why the outer layer is maintained so carefully, not just for camouflage, because the existence of genuinely innocent outer layer participants makes the entrapment of inner layer participants more complete. If you're at a dinner with Nobel laureates and heads of state, and you are then taken somewhere else, shown something else, given the second password, the contrast between the legitimate outer world and the illegitimate inner world is itself the trap. You came from somewhere respectable, and you chose to go further. That choice is the second password, and it is irrevocable. Bill survived Somerton because he never got the second password. He was in the outer layer without the inner circle's prior knowledge. An unbound witness is the only thing these networks cannot manage through the standard toolkit, which is why the response to an unbound witness is always Ziegler, the replacement of reality, the management of perception, the transformation of the witness into someone who is no longer sure exactly what it was that they saw. Now, let's return to where we began, January 1999, a screening room at Childwick Bury Manor in Hertfordshire, England. Stanley Kubrick's final cut of Eyes Wide Shut projected for the people who needed to decide whether it could reach the public in the form that he had made it. In that room were Warner Brothers executives, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And, in all likelihood, given the film's subject matter and the social world Kubrick had inhabited for 30 years in England, people whose relationship to the networks he was depicting were not purely academic. What exactly did the full cut contain that the released version does not? We cannot know with any certainty. The cut has never been made available. No one who saw it has spoken specifically about what it contained, but we can reason from the logic of what was altered, what was removed, and what Kubrick's own filmmaking practice tells us about where additional material would have been placed and what function it would have served. He showed it to the people in that room, and he was dead 6 days later. His cut was modified within days of his death and has never been seen by the public. And 25 years later, the Epstein documents confirmed that the system he documented was real and that its operational logic was exactly as he had depicted it. In the archives of the FBI, there is a document describing a former president of the United States watching the ritual murder of a minor on a yacht in international waters. The FBI kept that document, filed it, archived it, and never investigated it. Allow me to explain what that document means, where these rituals come from, why children, why the powerful, and what the esoteric traditions that have documented these practices for millennia reveal about the darkest operating system of human power. The Department of Justice dumps over 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos from the Epstein case, the largest single disclosure in American legal history. 43 victims, full names exposed, including minors. Unredacted images published on the government website. Attorneys for over 200 survivors called it the single most monstrous violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history. The powerful stayed behind redactions. The victims got exposed. Buried in those pages, between the flight logs and bank records, sits a category of documents the media barely touched. Documents describing rituals, children, presidential figures, acts so extreme they sit in official federal reports, archived but never pursued. Why would people who already have everything engage in ritualized extreme transgressions? What function does it serve? What does the tradition of Moloch or Baal worship, millennia of initiatory rites, and centuries of documented elite ritual tell us about what this system actually is? Because once you understand the function, the Epstein case transforms. It stops looking like a criminal network and starts looking like a lodge that is Anunnaki at its core. Everyone calls Epstein a predator, and he was, but that misses the most important thing about him. Epstein was a keeper of a grimoire. September 2025, Bloomberg obtains 18,000 emails from Epstein's Yahoo account. Hey gang, Mad Mark here, and by popular demand, I now have merch available. I've found the perfect company to work with, and they do an outstanding job. There are t-shirts and hoodies available right now, and who knows what I will come up with in the future. There are 2 different designs to choose from at the moment. You have this one and this one. And these t-shirts and hoodies come in a variety of colors and sizes, so no matter what you're looking for, there's something for everybody. If you're watching this show right now on YouTube, you can find this merch by clicking the shop link below in the show description, or just pay a visit to www.madmarktv.com. That's the all-new Who Are the Aliens t-shirts and hoodies. Get yours today. 4 independent experts authenticated the information through cryptographic verification. 0 fabrication. What the emails revealed was a man who sent messages to himself documenting compromising situations involving the most powerful people on Earth, who cataloged photographs, videos, and records with surgical precision, who logged who was present, when, where, under what circumstances, and did so obsessively. He was building a weapon. In the Western esoteric tradition, a grimoire records power relationships. The grimoire grants power through documentation. Who owns what? Who did what? Under what conditions the debt gets called in? Every photograph Epstein took functioned as a seal. Every flight log, an invocation record. Every email, a binding contract. The powerful served him because he held the evidence. That evidence could destroy them at any moment. The Blomberg emails confirm this. A spreadsheet of $1.8 million in payments, watches to political aides, cars to lawyers, lingerie to teenage girls, all in the same ledger, all entries in the same grimoire. 650 emails with Ghislaine Maxwell, victim recruitment records, instructions for discrediting accusers. She claimed at trial she was a property manager. The emails show her functioning as primary handler. In ceremonial magic, the summoner who identifies, prepares, and delivers the offerings to the practitioner. Crisis management infrastructure. But a grimoire only works if the transgressions it documents are extreme enough to bind people permanently. A photograph at a party binds no one. A compromising financial record creates inconvenience. For permanent binding, you need something that the participant can never explain, never justify, and never escape. You need the ritual, and the ritual requires a specific kind of offering. This is the question everyone asks and almost nobody answers with the depth it requires. Why children? Why, across every century and every civilization, do the most extreme power rituals consistently involve children? The surface answer is obvious. Children are the ultimate taboo. Harming a child represents the single most universally condemned act across virtually every moral system on Earth. That makes it the most effective binding mechanism. Cross that line and you can never return to normal society. You belong to whoever witnessed you cross it. But the esoteric traditions go much deeper, and understanding their reasoning explains why this specific practice has persisted for thousands of years despite every effort to eradicate it. Start with Moloch. Moloch appears in the Hebrew Bible, in Leviticus and 2 Kings, as the deity to whom children were passed through fire. The traditional understanding, a bronze idol with outstretched arms, heated until glowing, into which children were placed as burnt offerings. The Tophet at Carthage, the sacrificial precinct dedicated to Baal and the Phoenician equivalents, contains the archaeological remains of thousands of children, urns, bones, organized, systematic, spanning centuries. The standard historical reading treats this as primitive superstition, ignorant people making offerings to imaginary gods. That reading is wrong. The esoteric traditions explain why. In the Canaanite theological framework, Moloch was not a distant deity requesting tribute. Moloch represented the principle of power obtained through the sacrifice of what is most precious. The offering had to cost the giver something irreplaceable. An animal was insufficient. Grain was meaningless. The offering had to be the one thing the human organism is biologically programmed to protect above all else, its own offspring. This is the key. The sacrifice of a child is the most violent possible act against human nature itself. It requires overriding the deepest biological programming in the human body. The protective instinct toward children is not cultural. It is neurological, hormonal, hardwired across millions of years of evolution. To override that programming deliberately in a ritualized context produces a psychological and neurological event of extraordinary magnitude. The practitioner is not simply committing a crime. They are fundamentally rewiring their own operating system, destroying the part of themselves that responds to vulnerability with protection, replacing it with something else. And who would know this information regarding human instinct better than a being who created us, an Anunnaki? As I have proven many times on this program, all of the ancient gods were the Anunnaki, going by different names in different cultures. So who exactly is this Moloch Baal god, who the practitioners of these cults and rituals seem to be worshiping? So what do we know for certain about Enlil? Well, one thing is for sure. He had nothing but hatred and disdain for humans. He was against our creation from the very beginning. He took great measures to try to starve us out of Sumeria in the years just prior to the Great Flood, and once he learned that this devastating flood was inevitable, he demanded that all humans be left on Earth to die. If that wasn't enough, he was greatly angered when he learned that Enki had saved some of the humans from perishing in the flood. But it doesn't end there. What about his relationship with Abraham, the man considered to be the father of the Jewish faith? Remember, Abraham was born and raised in Sumeria. He only left his home there when instructed to do so by his god Enlil, because Abraham and Enlil had entered into a covenant. If he did the things that Enlil requested of him, he would be rewarded by becoming the father of a great nation, and Enlil would bless him and his descendants. And what eventually happened years later, according to Genesis 22, verses 1 and 2? Enlil instructed Abraham to sacrifice his only son Isaac on Mount Moriah. Enlil instructed him, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to Mount Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering to me." Now, supposedly, a messenger of the Lord intervened at the last minute to prevent this tragedy. But was this the first documented case ever of a ritual to Moloch? After all, Enlil is sometimes referred to in alternative interpretations as the Great Satan with an M, meaning Great Administrator. Could the label Satan have derived from Satan? Others believe that Enlil is also the Phoenician Canaanite god Baal. Some scholars disregard this connection due to Enlil and Baal being from different pantheons. But remember, the Anunnaki constantly went by different names in different regions of Earth, and Baal was associated with child sacrifice and chaotic acts, and in later Christian Islamic traditions, Baal became synonymous with the devil, particularly when known as Beelzebub. Getting back to the temple on Epstein's Little St. James Island, some people have suggested that it is actually a temple to Baal or Moloch, and both of these entities were at various times represented as a bull. Was Enlil ever represented as a bull? Why, yes. Many times in Sumerian culture, Enlil was portrayed as a mighty ox or a great bull. But how could Enlil be Yahweh, Moloch, and Baal? Well, in some ancient interpretations, Moloch is seen as simply a title, similar to the term Lord, and this term Moloch was sometimes applied to Baal, who in some ancient cultures is sometimes seen as a counterpart to Enlil. That is why, children. That is what Moloch represents. And that is why this practice has survived every attempt to destroy it across 5,000 years of recorded history. The Bohemian Grove places a 40-foot owl at the center of its ritual. The owl has been linked to Moloch since antiquity, but the connection runs deeper than most analysts suggest. In Mesopotamian tradition, Lilith appears flanked by owls on the Burney relief, dated to approximately 1800 BC. The owl sees in darkness. It hunts while others sleep. It perceives what the daylight world cannot. In the Greek tradition, Athena's owl represents strategic intelligence, the capacity to see through deception and act with precision in conditions of zero visibility. When the most powerful men in America gather annually before a 40-foot owl and ritually burn their moral conscience in the cremation of care, the symbolism is precise. They are invoking the capacity to operate in darkness, to see what others cannot, to act without the constraint of care. The outer degrees are symbolic. The middle degrees are uncomfortable. The inner degrees are irreversible. Each step deeper binds the practitioner more completely to the hierarchy. and each step requires crossing a line that the previous step made possible. A person who attends the Bohemian Grove and watches an effigy burn has taken a first step. They have participated in a symbolic ritual with other powerful people. They have entered a shared space. They have begun to belong. But the inner circle requires more. And the most extreme inner circle requires the most extreme act. The act that makes all previous steps look innocent by comparison. The act from which there is no return. The Moloch exchange. Innocence for power. Humanity for operational freedom. The offering that costs you everything. Destruction of innocence inverts natural order completely. This is the Moloch principle made operational, the oldest mythological motif in existence. Osiris, torn apart by Set and scattered across Egypt. Dionysus, torn apart by the Titans in the Orphic Mysteries. Fragmentation of the whole into components that can be distributed, absorbed, incorporated into participants, consumption, completion of the cycle. The boundary between self and others dissolves. The participant who consumes becomes the vessel. Every communion ceremony in every religion is a domesticated echo, bread becoming flesh, wine becoming blood. The Aztec practice of consuming the heart of the sacrificial warrior to absorb his courage, the shared meal that seals the covenant. The Catholic Mass is constructed on the same principle. The covenant must be renewed, the body consumed again, the blood shared again, the ritual repeated because the bond requires continuous reinforcement. This is why the ritual persists. This is what Moloch represents, the exchange of innocence for power. And the esoteric traditions have always understood that this exchange is very real, that it produces measurable results, and that the cost is permanent. You do not come back from the other side of crossing that line. And that permanence is, from the system's perspective, the entire point. There is a further dimension that needs to be stated directly because the esoteric traditions say it directly. The practitioner who has crossed the ultimate line possesses an advantage over everyone who has not. They can look across the negotiating table at someone who is morally constrained and know with absolute certainty that they are willing to take it further. They will do things the other person cannot even imagine doing, that no threat, no moral appeal, no social pressure can constrain them because they have already destroyed that part of themselves that would respond to those things. This is the predatory advantage the system produces, and it is self-reinforcing. The practitioner who operates without moral constraint accumulates more power. More power grants access to deeper levels of transgression. Deeper levels of transgression destroys the constraints. The cycle accelerates. Every secret society document that describes degrees of initiation is describing this escalation. First degree, symbolic. Second degree, uncomfortable. Third degree, compromising. Inner degrees, irreversible. Hoover ran the FBI this way for over 50 years. 8 presidents and none dared remove him. Epstein ran the same system with exponentially more material. Unlike Hoover, Epstein had video. But there is a third function, the one virtually no analyst discusses because they lack the vocabulary. Function 3, the creation of an egregore in cult tradition. When a group performs a ritual involving extreme emotional intensity, they generate a collective psychic entity known as an egregore. The egregore is not metaphor. In the tradition, it is understood as an autonomous force created by concentrated group consciousness, which then sustains itself by feeding on the emotional energy of its members. This concept appears across traditions: the Tibetan Buddhist tulpa, the Kabbalistic concept of the golem animated by collective intention, the Christian theological idea of the mystical body of Christ as a living entity composed of all believers. The egregore binds the group in a way that transcends individual calculation. It creates loyalty that defies rational self-interest, a shared reality, a shared identity, a covenant that exists outside every social structure. Law does not reach it. Morality does not apply to it. It operates at a depth below conscious decision, and it sustains itself. This is critical. In the esoteric traditions, the egregore, once created, requires feeding. It needs periodic ritual to maintain its cohesion. This is why the ceremonies continually repeat, why Epstein's network operated continuously for decades, why the flight logs show the same names returning again and again. Each return strengthened the binding. Each new transgression fed the collective entity that held the group together. This is why Epstein maintained constant contact, why Maxwell managed relationships with such intensity, why the inner circle gathered repeatedly on the island, on the yacht, in the mansion. The egregore required maintenance, and the maintenance required repetition of the founding act. The difference is the nature of the offering, and the nature of the offering determines the power of the egregore. This is why the ritual cannot happen in a normal place. It requires liminal territory, space that exists between categories, between nations, between laws. The yacht in international waters, the island surrounded by the sea, the temple on the cliff. Every esoteric tradition places its most powerful rituals in spaces set apart from the regular world. The grove outside the city, the cave beneath the mountain, the crossroads at midnight, Epstein's Island, Little St. James, Caribbean, surrounded by ocean. On its southwest cliff, a structure everyone calls the temple, blue and white stripes replicating the ablak pattern found on sacred buildings in Jerusalem and Damascus, a golden dome, zodiac constellations painted on the ceiling, a labyrinth terrace, and a lock on the outside of the door. A contractor examined the building and noted if you wanted to keep people out, the lock would be on the inside. This lock was designed to keep people in. Sacred space ritual, egregore documentation. Grimier, that is the complete system. Every element serves a function. Every function has been documented across centuries of esoteric practice. And every piece of the Epstein network maps onto it precisely. Look at the historical evidence. Carthage, Rome, medieval France, the French monarchy, British intelligence, American intelligence, the Bohemian Grove, financial elites, tech billionaires, different centuries, different continents, different cultures, identical structure, identical methods, identical outcomes. If this were random organizations, you would expect variations, different elites producing different pathologies, random distribution. But instead, the same architecture appears with mathematical consistency. The esoteric traditions, from the Gnostics to the Kabbalists to the left-hand path practitioners, have all described this as the shadow side of human hierarchical organization. Power, when it reaches sufficient concentration, generates practices that ordinary morality cannot account for. And those practices, because they remove moral constraints from the practitioners, tend to compound. The unconstrained actor accumulates more power, uses that power to create more unconstrained actors who accumulate more power. This is the cycle the esoteric traditions have been documenting for millennia. The Epstein files are the most contemporary visible fragment of a pattern that extends to the foundations of civilization itself. If what was released is this disturbing, what fills those sealed pages that we will never see? Someone built this system before Epstein. Someone taught him how it worked, and someone is running a version of it right now. Who is archiving now? Who is documenting now? Who controls this new grimoire? And this is where the investigation ends, not with answers, because the full records remain locked in sealed court records, classified intelligence files, and the permanent silence of people who understood what they were protecting when they chose to protect it. But with a document, the film that Kubrick made, restored to something closer to what he intended it to be read as. The Epstein network confirmed the structural reality Kubrick depicted. The flight logs confirmed the geography. The victim testimony confirmed the methodology. And the court records confirmed the infrastructure of silence. Kubrick showed us everything. The house, the ritual, the reversed liturgy, the woman who disappears, the fixer who rewrites memory, the second password that binds permanently, the first password that provides cover. He showed us everything in the only language he knew could survive, the language of fiction, the language of a story that audiences would watch as entertainment and file away as a confusing Tom Cruise movie in 1999. And the people in the screening room understood that this language, this particular encoding, was survivable, that most audiences would not see what was in the background, that the confession could be released in this form because the form itself would protect it. And they were right for 20 years. Then the Epstein files dropped. And there you have it. The Anunnaki continue to control our planet by controlling the people in power, and they continue this control by having evidence against them that could destroy their careers if it was ever exposed. And it's a system that has been working for several thousand years now. Is it worth it to sell your soul to these Anunnaki gods to gain wealth and power? That's a question only you can answer. And that is where I leave you for this extended episode. I'm Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this extended presentation. If so, please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. And please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Also, please tell your friends and help spread the word about this show. I apologize for the length of this installment, but I think you will agree that it was well worth it. Today we have taken another step in our ongoing journey to discover the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Peace to all of you, and remember to always walk in love. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to the mysteries that puzzle mankind.